Hey everyone, and a big thanks to Lit RPG Reads and Paul Bello Finefellow for inspiring this deep dive. We're going to be taking a closer look at the Gelatinous Cube. It's a classic D&D monster, often played for laughs, but there's actually a surprising amount of depth to these jiggly dungeon dwellers
Yeah.
beyond just being a big blob of acid.
Yeah.
I remember one campaign where our dungeon master described this perfectly clean corridor. It was in this otherwise dusty and cobweb-filled dungeon. And, well, we should have known better. Our party's barbarian. Total smash first ask questions later kind of guy. Charged right in, eager to loot whatever was at the end of the hall. Next thing we know, poof, he disappears into thin air. It was a gelatinous cube, perfectly camouflaged against the clean stone. The rest of us barely managed to pull him out. His armor was half dissolved and he reeked of something awful. That experience really drove home how the gelatinous cube, despite its simplicity, can create these incredible moments of surprise and humor. And a campaign. So, let's dive into what makes these creatures so fascinating. First off, the basics. The gelatinous cube is, well, the cube. It's transparent, making it incredibly difficult to spot, especially in dimly lit dungeons. And of course, it's filled with highly corrosive acid. That could dissolve pretty much anything it touches. Imagine the cleanup. It moves slowly. But that almost makes it more terrifying. It's like this inexorable force that just oozes through the dungeon, consuming anything in its path. And the fact that it's basically a giant walking stomach adds to the creep factor. You never know what you might find partially digested inside one of these things. Discarded weapons, armor, maybe even the remains of some poor adventurer who wasn't paying attention.
What's fascinating to me is that the gelatinous cube embodies both the danger and the humor that are so central to D&D. On one hand, it's a legitimate threat capable of dissolving adventurers in a matter of rounds. But on the other hand, it's this absurd creature, a slow-moving blob of jelly, that's essentially the dungeon's accidental cleaning crew. Think about it. Dungeons are these dark, dangerous places filled with all sorts of nasty creatures and decaying matter. Without some kind of natural cleaning system, they'd be absolutely uninhabitable. That's where the gelatinous cube comes in. It's a gruesome but necessary part of the dungeon ecosystem, consuming debris, decomposing bodies, keeping things, well, relatively tidy. The article you shared actually refers to them as dungeon janitors, which I find both hilarious and strangely appropriate. Imagine a group of goblins posting warning signs around a particularly large cube. Caution! Janitor on duty! Or a group of kobolds using a cube to dispose of their trash. It's this kind of unexpected humor that makes D&D so much fun. You can have these moments of genuine terror and tension, but then there's always the potential for something absurd to happen and completely change the mood. And it's not just about the humor. The gelatinous cube's role as a dungeon janitor actually adds a layer of believability to these environments. It's a reminder that even in a fantastical setting, there's a certain logic to the way things work. Dungeons are ecosystems, just like any other environment, and they need mechanisms to maintain balance. And that's something that DMs can really play with. Imagine describing a corridor that's suspiciously clean compared to the rest of the dungeon. Maybe there's a faint sizzling sound coming from around the corner, or the players notice a trail of partially dissolved debris leading into a room. These subtle cues can create a sense of unease, foreshadowing the presence of a cube without giving away the surprise. And when the players finally encounter the creature, it's not just a random monster encounter. It's a part of the dungeon's natural order. This is where the real fun begins. It's not just about throwing a cube at your players and seeing who survives. It's about using the cube's unique properties to create challenges that are both engaging and entertaining. Think about it. You've got this massive blob of acid that moves predictably. What could you do with that? You could, for example, create an environmental puzzle. Imagine a cube blocking a vital passageway. Or maybe it contains an essential quest item. The players can't just attack it head on. They have to figure out a way to get around it, or maybe even use its properties to their advantage. The article talks about the classic cube room dungeon trap. This is where you have a room or a series of corridors filled with one or more gelatinous cubes. The players have to navigate this space carefully, using their wits and resources to avoid being engulfed. You can even add variations to this, like having cubes move between floors through shafts, adding a vertical element to the challenge. And for advanced parties, multiple cubes can be used to create truly mind-bending puzzles. Imagine cubes moving in coordinated patterns, or cubes that split when damaged, adding even more chaos to the encounter. The key is to think outside the box, just like the players have to do when they're faced with a gelatinous cube. Don't be afraid to get creative and come up with encounters that will surprise and delight your players. One of my favorite things about gelatinous cubes is how they can inspire player creativity The article you shared has some fantastic examples of how players have used cubes to their advantage. Remember, you've got this massive blob of acid that moves predictably. There are so many possibilities.
Okay, I'm really curious to hear about some of these creative solutions. What kind of things have players come up with?
Well, imagine a party needs to dispose of a body quickly and quietly. What better way than to lure it into the path of a gelatinous cube? No fuss, just a clean corridor and a slightly larger cube. Or consider a scenario where the party is trapped in a room with no visible exit. But wait, there's a gelatinous cube slowly making its way towards them. Could they somehow freeze the cube, creating a temporary bridge to safety? I've even heard of players collecting the acidic residue from a cube and using it as a makeshift weapon. Talk about turning your enemy's strengths against them.
That's amazing. It just goes to show that gelatinous cubes aren't just obstacles to be overcome. They can be opportunities for creative problem solving. It reminds me of that time our party was trying to cross a chasm. We were out of rope and couldn't figure out how to get across. Then one of our players, a gnome rogue with a knack for crazy ideas, suggested we use a gelatinous cube as a bridge. We all looked at him like he was crazy, but he insisted it would work. We managed to lure a cube to the edge of the chasm and read it. Using a combination of spells and some very careful maneuvering, we managed to solidify its surface just enough to create a temporary walkway. It was risky, but it worked. We got across the chasm and lived to tell the tale. That's the beauty of D&D. You never know what crazy ideas your fellow players will come up with.
Exactly. And a good dungeon master will reward players who think outside the box. It's all about creating a dynamic and interactive experience where the players feel like they have agency and can impact the world around them. Speaking of the world around them, it's interesting to consider the broader implications of gelatinous cubes. We've talked about them as dungeon janitors. But what if they existed in the wider ecosystem?
That's a really intriguing thought. I've never considered them outside of a dungeon environment.
Well, think about it. The cube consumes organic matter, breaks it down, and leaves behind, well, not much. It's essentially a natural recycling system. Now imagine a world where gelatinous cubes aren't confined to dungeons. Could they play a role in waste management, in breaking down pollutants, in maintaining the balance of nature on a larger scale?
Whoa. Mind blown. It's like taking the concept of the cube and applying it to real-world environmental challenges.
Exactly. It's a bit of a thought experiment, but it highlights the potential for even the most fantastical creatures to inspire creative thinking about real-world issues.
That's what I love about D&D. It's a game that can spark our imaginations, make us laugh, and even challenge us to think differently about the world around us.
Couldn't agree more. It's a game where anything is possible and the only limit is your imagination. And when it comes to gelatinous cubes, the possibilities are truly endless. They're a constant source of surprise humor and creative problem solving. They challenge us to think differently about dungeon ecology and the role of even the smallest creatures in maintaining balance. Plus, they're just plain fun. You never know what kind of chaotic or hilarious situation a gelatinous cube might lead to. They embody that unique blend of danger and absurdity that makes D&D so captivating.
Absolutely. They're a testament to the game's ability to blend fantasy, strategy, and humor into an unforgettable experience. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of gelatinous cubes, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Don't underestimate the power of these jiggly blobs of acid. They're more than just monsters. They're symbols of dungeon ecology, sources of unexpected humor, and catalysts for creative problem solving. Embrace the chaos. Embrace the absurdity. And let the gelatinous cube inspire you.
And always remember, watch out for those suspiciously clean corridors.
A huge thank you to Lit RPG Reads and, of course, to Paul Bello, fine fellow, for inspiring this fascinating conversation. Until next time.
May your adventures be filled with laughter, camaraderie, and just a touch of cube-induced mayhem. And if you have any memorable gelatinous cube stories of your own, we'd love to hear them. You know those moments where a cube completely derailed your plans or led to some unexpected hilarity?
Absolutely. Share them in the comments or tag us on social media. We're always up for a good cube tale. But before we sign off, there's one more thing I want to touch on. We've talked about the gelatinous cube's role as a dungeon janitor and how it reflects the natural processes of decomposition and recycling. It's made me think about how even the most fantastical creatures can inspire us to look at real-world issues in new ways.
You know, that's a really insightful point. We often think of fantasy creatures as being completely separate from our own world. But the truth is that they can often reflect our own anxieties, hopes, and even our scientific understanding. The gelatinous cube, with its ability to break down organic matter and essentially recycle it, could be seen as a metaphor for our own efforts to find sustainable solutions to waste management and pollution.
That's a really cool way to look at it. It's like the gelatinous cube is a fantastical representation of the processes we're trying to replicate in the real world. And it just goes to show that even in a game about slaying dragons and looting treasure, there's room for a little bit of environmental awareness and maybe even some inspiration for real-world problem solving.
Absolutely. D&D is a game that encourages us to use our imaginations, to think creatively and to find solutions to challenges, whether they're in a dungeon or in the real world. So next time you encounter a gelatinous cube, don't just think of it as a monster to be defeated. Think of it as a reminder that even the most seemingly insignificant creatures can have a profound impact on their environment. And who knows, maybe it'll even spark an idea for a new invention or a solution to a pressing environmental problem.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. The gelatinous cube. More than just a jiggly blob of acid, it's a dungeon janitor, a predator, a puzzle element, a symbol of ecological balance, and maybe even a source of inspiration for real-world solutions. Until next time, keep rolling those dice, stay curious, and watch out for those suspiciously clean corridors.
And as always, may your adventures be filled with laughter, camaraderie, and maybe just a touch of cube-induced chaos.
A final thanks again to Lit RPG Reads and to Paul Bella Finefellow for inspiring today's deep dive.
Until next time, it's funny we talk about these kind of like high concept ideas, but sometimes the best gelatinous cube moments are the simplest ones.
Oh yeah, totally. Like that time our party's rogue tried to sneak past a cube by covering himself in oil, thinking it would make him slippery.
Oh no.
It did not end well.
No, I bet not.
The oil just made the acid stick to him more.
Oh.
It was a messy situation.
It's a classic mistake, that right? You think you've outsmarted the dungeon, but the dungeon always has a way of getting the last laugh.
Exactly. It's a good reminder to never underestimate the dangers of a dungeon. Even something as seemingly simple as a gelatinous cube.
Absolutely. And you know what else is great about gelatinous cubes? They can be used to introduce new players to the game.
Oh, how so?
Well, they're a relatively straightforward monster to understand. They're a big blob of acid. You don't want to touch it. But they also present a unique challenge that requires players to think creatively. It's a great way to teach them about the importance of strategy and teamwork.
That's a good point. Plus, new players are often the most likely to make those hilarious mistakes, like trying to oil themselves up to slide past a cube.
Exactly. Those are the moments that create the best stories.
So, if you're a new player, don't be afraid of the gelatinous cube. Embrace it. It's a rite of passage for any D&D adventurer.
And who knows, maybe you'll even come up with a brilliant new way to defeat it.
Or at least a really funny way to die trying.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up our deep dive.
Yes, indeed. It's been a fascinating journey into the world of gelatinous cubes.
From their role as dungeon janitors to their potential as real-world inspiration, these creatures are more than just monsters. They're a testament to the creativity and imagination that make D&D such a special game.
I couldn't agree more. So to all our listeners out there, may your dungeons be filled with adventure, your dice rolls be ever in your favor, and may you always be wary of those suspiciously clean corridors.
And of course, a huge thanks to Lit RPG Reads and to Paul Gallo, fine fellow, for inspiring this deep dive.
Until next time.
Keep on rolling.